Shimon Redlich, Professor Emeritus of East European Jewish History at Ben-Gurion University. In 2002, you published Together and Apart in Brzeżany, Poles, Jews, and Ukrainians, 1919 until 1945. Tell us about the book and your approach.
My book about Brzeżany combines my autobiography with a historical analysis. I wanted to recreate my early childhood in Brzeżany within the wider context of that place and that area.
You're currently working on a similar account on your years post-war in Lodz between 1945 until 1950 when you left for Israel. Let's talk about Lodz. Lodz before the war was the second largest Jewish community in Poland, about 250,000 people.
Well, Lodz was one of the largest metropolitan areas in pre-war Poland already, an industrial town, not especially Jewish. There was a large Jewish population, but the Manchester, as they used to call it, referred in general to the industry, the cloth industry in pre-war Lodz. The most striking phenomenon is that Jewish life in post-war Lodz was life in transit. Jews came and Jews left all the time. As for the number of Jews, more than 60,000 Jews passed through the city of Lodz. And Lodz became a very desirable place to settle, to live in during the first immediate post-war years. Between 800 to 1,000 Jews, mostly young males, survived the Lodz ghetto. So if we talk about demography of Jewish Lodz, the beginning number is around 1,000 Jews. These were people who were supposed to clean up the Lodz ghetto area and somehow succeeded to survive.
The film centers around Helanuvek. And Helanuvek in 1935, I believe, was like a summer camp founded by Chaim Bromkowski. Right. And after the war, Helanuvek was an orphanage.
They didn't call it in Polish orphanage, they called it Dom Dziecka, which translates into English a children's house. As you know, I was not a full-time resident in Helanuvek. I came to Helanuvek for one summer, and I don't recall exactly whether it was 46 or maybe 47. I spent there just a few weeks, like getting out of the town and being within the nature, trees, good air, clean air, and so on. So my mother put me in Helanuvek for a few weeks. So I can tell you just about my impressions of these few weeks that I spent there. It was something very new to me. I was always, even under the most severe circumstances, I was never separated from my closest family, at least from my mother, right, which is a tremendous advantage. And I learn about this as the years go by more and more. Sometimes when a person was a young child, a boy was in the Nazi-occupied area, and he was all the time with his family, or at least one of his parents, I would dare to say that his fate was maybe even slightly lighter, not so severe as some Jewish children not under Nazi occupation, like refugees in the Soviet Union who were completely alone. So the first time that I was not with my mother, was in Hellenuve. And I had mixed reactions to that. My memories of Undzere Kinder are very good and pleasant memories. Because, you know, a boy of 13, something around that age, to be invited to participate in a film. So it was very exciting for me, and the memories are very pleasant. It was like an adventure. How were the children recruited, from where, and who were those children? That's an important question that was never raised in whatever has been written until now about Undzere Kinder. That these were three different groups of children. One group came from Hellenuve itself. The other group came from the Yiddish Yud Lamed Peretz school. And the third group, of which I was part, came from the Zionist Hebrew school named after the ghetto fighters. How was I chosen from the large group of children who attended these schools? One of the people who assisted Nathan Gross in preparing this film and getting children to play in it was the teacher that I remember most from my Hebrew school. That was our teacher of music and crafts. His name was Igor Glantz, Israel Glantz. I recently interviewed his widow because sadly enough, some years ago he passed away and I didn't talk to him about it. Anyhow, he took those children who were known as those who performed during celebrations, declamations, performances, and so on. And he was the one who also coached me, trained me how to tell my story. At that time, I did not know Yiddish well, a little bit, but really not well. So my text was written down for me in Latin letters, in Polish letters, but in Yiddish. So actually, I learned it by heart, but I must have understood at least part of it because it looks not so bad when you see it, hear it in the film.
The assumption that the stories that the children tell each other in the film are their own stories. We know that's not the case. Your story is different from the story playing in the film. Why were the children not simply asked to tell their own stories?
I don't know what were the considerations of those who prepared the script for the film, but I do know for sure that my story and the other two children's stories are not their stories. Jigan and Schumacher came to Lodz in late 47 from the Soviet Union. It was known that in a few months or maximum a year, they will leave. And Goskin, the producer, wanted very much to make a film with Jigan and Schumacher. So things had to be done fast. Goskin and Nathan Gross and Jigan and Schumacher and the writer Rachel Auerbach got together, mostly without Goskin, and they met several times in Lodz and in some nice area near the Czech border where they went on vacation that I learned from Nathan Gross. And they just sat down together and wrote this script, including the maybe fictional stories, but maybe these are not fictional stories. Why? I assume that Rachel Auerbach, who was collecting evidence of people's histories, stories during the war for the Jewish Historical Commission, Central Jewish Historical Commission, which functioned in Lodz, she went through tens, if not hundreds, of children's testimonies. And I would not be surprised if some of the material which appears in the children's stories in Undzere Kinder was taken from real testimonies. But these were not the stories of the actor children who acted in the film. I'm thinking right now, maybe, we were never asked, I and my close friends, at school or at the youth movement, we were never asked about our wartime experiences. So I assume that except for the activities of the Jewish Historical Commission, who approached certain people, mainly adults, to give their testimonies, to submit their testimonies, it was not discussed with children.
The only two people in the film that have no narrative, other than being Jigan and Schumacher, are Jigan and Schumacher. There's nothing in the film that points to how they survived, as if they were not part of the story.
I don't know. I think that they were just put in this film because of being the two most popular Jewish comedians in pre-war Poland, and they became even more important in post-war Poland. There are accounts of very emotional encounters of the Jewish public, post-war Jewish public, with Jigan and Schumacher. And Goskind just wanted them. So you see that the most important part are actually that they play some sketches, some scenes that they used to play before the war, like the Sholem Aleichem piece, Brand, about the shtetl on fire. Nathan Gross was in his early 20s when the war ended. He survived in the Krakow ghetto and some time also in the Warsaw ghetto. And after that, for a year or so, he was on Aryan papers. He was living under an assumed Polish name, and he wrote very interesting memoirs about this. First, he wanted to study law, but then he didn't like it, and he went to the first preparatory course for young filmmakers, which was taught in Krakow immediately in 1945. And then he was approached by Goskind. And Nathan didn't know Yiddish well at that time. He confided in me. He says, I learned Yiddish while working on Undzere Kinder. And he was mobilized by Goskind as a young, freshly baked director. And he became part of this group who prepared Undzere Kinder. I would like to add some remark by Nathan Gross. It's funny, but it gives you some idea of our relationship and his relation with those children who played. Nathan Gross looked us up after 30 years or so in Tel Aviv, when the film was shown for the first time in the Tel Aviv Cinematheque. And the Tel Aviv municipality invited all of us, those who could be located, those who played in the film. Was a very emotional encounter, get-together of people who were once children and then already quite advanced in age. And I had something, a funny incident when I called Nathan Gross about a year before his death, and I told him, he asked me, how are you, what's doing? I told him, I just recently retired from teaching at Ben Gurion University. So his reaction was a typical laugh of Nathan Gross, and he asked, are you telling me that children are going on pension in these days? My personal memories of those years are maybe unlike what's written in many history books which emphasize the trauma, the post-trauma, how difficult it was, how sad it was. For me, those 4.5 years in Lodz were some of the happiest years in my life. These 4 or 5 years were located in a way in between, sandwiched in between two difficult and in a very different way traumatic experiences in my life. Preceding Lodz was, of course, the Holocaust and Brzeżany and the ghetto and hiding and the losses in my family and so on. And then after Lodz, I made Aliyah to Israel. And the first years in Israel weren't the most happy and easy years. So if I look at this from this perspective of what happened before and what happened after, the time of Lodz stands out as a good time. There were some anti-Semitic incidents, which I recall, and I'm writing about them in my Lodz book. But on the whole, living with my family and living within two surroundings, very encouraging, very, very optimistic. One was the Hebrew school. That was one place where I spent great part of my life. And the other one was the youth movement, HaShomer HaTzair, where I belonged to about all this time that I was in Lodz. And all this gives me a good feeling when I look back on those years.